In the middle of a blizzard sweeping across a deserted mountain pass, an old pickup truck slowed and came to a stop when its headlights caught an elderly man clutching a nearly motionless baby, with two other children trembling close behind. A woman stepped out into the freezing wind, no questions, no pressure, quietly opening her truck door and waiting for a life or death decision. She had no idea that this single moment would pull her into a story far beyond the stormy night and change her life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. Snow swallowed the road before Naomi Carter ever saw the sharp curve sign. The wind slammed into the side of the truck like a giant hand, forcing her to clamp down on the steering wheel. Her headlights cut into a wall of white, no edges, no landmarks, nothing to hold on to, just sheets of snow rushing at her, relentless, unforgiving. Naomi slowed to a crawl, inching her way along the old mountain pass that led home. Late night, the storm at its peak, and the northern mountain locals called it by another name, didn't care who tried to cross it. The old pickup let out a thin, fragile screech as the tires slid over black ice. Naomi adjusted the wipers, but the windshield only smeared further. She was used to this. Used to roads no one bothered to fix. Used to driving herself home after the town had gone dark. Used to the silence behind dismissive looks at the gas station, the grocery store, the diner, places where people called each other by name but rarely hers. Naomi was in her 40s, a widow, living with two children on the mountainside. By day she did manual labor, by night she repaired whatever people discarded as not worth the trouble in the small garage behind her house. There had been a time when she studied engineering, when she believed numbers and circuits could carry her somewhere else. Then life closed a door, and she learned how to stay still. Tonight she just wanted to get home. A streak of movement cut across her headlights. Naomi sucked in a breath. She hit the brakes. The truck skidded, slid, then stopped hard near the shoulder. In the trembling cone of light ahead, a figure appeared, then two more. An elderly white man, his shoulders hunched against the wind, was leading two children. In his arms he carried a smaller child, head slumped into the hollow of his neck, body limp as if sunk into a sleep too deep. The children's scarves were stiff with ice, their coats were crusted with snow. The wind shoved them sideways, forcing all three to bow their heads just to stay upright. Naomi looked around. The pass was empty. Distant headlights streaked by and vanished around the bend. No one stopped. No one slowed. No one asked. She turned off the radio. In the sudden quiet there was only the shriek of the wind and the rapid thud of her heart. Naomi rested her hand on the gear shift, then let go. She had seen enough nights like this to know the mountain wouldn't wait. She also knew something else, that some moments, if you turn away, are gone forever. She opened the door. The cold struck her face head-on, slicing her breath short. Snow poured down her collar, clung to her lashes, froze them stiff. Naomi pulled her hood tight and stepped onto the road. Her first step slid halfway out. The second found its footing. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice shredded by the wind. The old man flinched, instinctively pulling the children back. The baby in his arms let out a thin sound, a weak moan, then went still. Naomi stopped several feet away, not moving closer. The headlights stretched her shadow long and distorted across the snow. An SUV roared past, red taillights flashing once before disappearing. Snow rushed in to fill the space it left behind. Naomi looked at the baby, pale face, faded lips, one small hand hanging loose, the glove soaked through. She didn't need to touch the child to know this was not cold that could be endured much longer. "This road isn't safe," Naomi said, keeping her voice even. "The storm's closing the pass." The man didn't answer, he only tightened his grip. The two older children tried to stand straight, but their knees trembled in rhythm. The wind howled harder, flinging snow like white blades. Naomi glanced at the clock on her dashboard. Time moved fast in the cold, and terribly slow when fear took hold. She stepped back half a pace, then stopped. No waving, no gestures, just standing there between the wind and the headlights, facing three figures stranded on the shoulder as if the rest of the world had withdrawn. A distant horn. Another car passing. Again no one stopped. Naomi felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the old feeling from other nights, when pleas were swallowed by the wind. She swallowed hard, and held her hands open in front of her, showing she carried nothing. "My house is up there," she said, pointing toward the slope swallowed by snow. "Not far." The wind surged. One child stumbled, dropping to their knees and bursting into tears. The old man bent to help, clumsy with the weight of the baby and the pull of the other child. The baby breathed out, a short, frightening breath. Naomi took one step forward, then stopped. She met the man's eyes, letting him see her clearly in the headlights. A black woman in a worn coat, an old truck pulled over on an empty mountain road. She felt the invisible wall rise between them. Thick, immediate. "Listen to me," Naomi said, lowering her voice. "Tonight there aren't many choices." The man didn't answer, he only stared, his grip tightening as the wind drove snow across the road and erased its edges. Naomi stayed where she was. She didn't move closer, she didn't move away. The old man drew the children in, his arms rigid. His eyes swept over Naomi, then the truck idling behind her, then the empty road searching for something familiar, something he could trust. "You should go," he said. "We're fine." Naomi looked at the baby, eyes shut, lashes frozen together, a chest rising and falling too slowly. "She isn't," Naomi said. He shook his head. "She's just cold." A car passed, headlights flaring and vanishing. The space it left behind felt heavier. One child bent into the wind. The other trembled, trying to stay upright. The man's gaze returned to Naomi, not to listen, but to decide. "You don't know who we are," he said. Naomi nodded once. "That's true." She said nothing more. He pulled the children back another half step. Small, final. Naomi recognized it, the moment just before people turned away. "Go," he said again. Naomi glanced at her truck. At the road disappearing into white, she could leave. The mountain would erase this in minutes. The wind shifted, the man staggered. One child nearly fell. The baby released a breath so thin it barely disturbed the air. Naomi stepped forward, one step, and stopped. She raised her hands, palms open. "Listen once," she said. "This storm isn't giving you more time." The man looked at the truck again, at its dents and scratches, at the absence of anything that looked like certainty. Naomi saw it then. He wasn't only afraid of the storm, he was afraid of her, afraid of the unfamiliar, afraid of making a choice that put his grandchildren's lives in the hands of someone he couldn't read. The feeling scraped lightly across Naomi's chest, nothing new, but still sharp. She remembered those same looks in town, in stores, in meetings where her voice drifted past like wind. She drew a deep breath, held back what didn't need to be said. "We'll keep going," he repeated, as if convincing himself. Just past that bend. Naomi looked toward the curve. Snow churned into a thick curtain. Wind screamed. There was nothing there but more mountain, more cold, more time being taken away. "Can't you see?" she said, pointing, not at him, but at the baby. Her lips. The old man looked down instinctively. The small mouth was frighteningly pale. His grip tightened. The two older children stared, confusion spreading across their faces. One began to cry, not aloud, just broken breaths. A large truck thundered past, spraying snow like surf. The wind forced them all sideways. Naomi slid half a step, caught herself. The old man stumbled, twisting his body to shield the children. In that instant, Naomi saw it. The fear in his eyes was no longer whole, it had cracked. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't," Naomi cut in, very gently. "I do." She said nothing more. No story, no proof. She let the words fall between them, heavy and real. The wind shifted again. Snow thickened. The road behind Naomi faded. The one ahead of the old man was no better. Two directions, equally cruel. The old man looked at Naomi once more. This time, his eyes weren't searching for danger. They were searching for a way out. "Who are you?" he asked. She answered slowly, as if each word had to fight its way through the wind. "Naomi," he nodded. Not acceptance, just acknowledgement. He looked at the baby, then at Naomi, then at the road. Naomi felt the moment stretch, a taut line pulled between two decisions. She didn't move closer. She didn't step back. She stayed where she was, letting him see that this choice, terrifying as it was, still existed. On that storm-buried roadside, where time was cut into thin breaths, an unspoken question hung between them. And Naomi knew that one more sign, a weaker breath, a faltering step, would force everything into what came next. The wind shifted abruptly, slamming into the roadside, like a deliberate blow. Snow surged up, thick, sharp, filling the space between Naomi and the three figures. For several seconds there was only white and the scream of wind, no faces, no eyes, no choices. Naomi narrowed her eyes and held her ground, feeling the earth shudder faintly beneath ice that was slowly shifting. When the curtain of snow thinned, the baby in the old man's arms released a breath so weak, Naomi had to tilt her head, to be sure it was real. Naomi didn't wait. She pointed, cleanly, decisively, without stepping closer. Her lips, she said. "Look." The old man bent down on instinct. In the headlights, the child's face was nearly the color of the snow. Lips drained of color, lashes frozen together. One small hand hung loose inside a soaked glove. He tightened his hold, as if grip alone could keep her here. "My house is 10 minutes from here," Naomi said. Her voice stayed even. "You don't have to trust me, just let her live." The words fell between them. She offered nothing else. The wind surged. One of the children slipped and went down hard. Snow clung to their legs as they struggled to rise. The old man turned to shield them, off balance with the baby and the pull of the other child. Naomi stepped forward half a pace, then stopped. He began. Then faltered. Naomi said nothing. The wind spoke. Time did the rest. The next breath came late, shorter. "Do you hear that?" Naomi said softly. "She's slipping." The old man looked up. The fear in his eyes cracked, leaving something raw beneath it. He looked down the road ahead, only white, only wind, only cars that didn't stop. A truck roared past, high beams cutting across them. Snow exploded into needles. When it was gone, the other child fell again, crying out before the wind tore the sound apart. Naomi stepped closer, close enough now that he could hear her breathing. "This storm isn't giving you 10 more minutes." He looked at the baby, at Naomi, at the children shaking beside him. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what was left to choose. "I'm here," Naomi said. Nothing more. The wind shifted. Snow thickened. The road behind Naomi faded. The road ahead did the same. Two directions collapsed into one. The baby made a sound, faint, lingering, wrong. Naomi held her ground. "My house," she said again. 10 minutes. The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was no longer searching for certainty, only for something he could live with. A stronger gust knocked him sideways. He dropped to one knee. The baby jolted, then went still. Naomi moved. This time she didn't stop. She came close enough for him to see the ice on her lashes, the cracks in her skin from the cold. She raised her hand slowly, intention clear before action. "Give her to me," she said. The old man looked at her hands, then her face, then the children. Wind screamed. Snow spun. The road disappeared. "No," he said, almost out of habit. But the hand holding the baby trembled, no longer steady. The contradiction was painfully clear. Naomi didn't pull her hands back. She held them there, patient, as if time itself had slowed to make room for this choice. "You don't have to trust me," she repeated. Word for word, "Just let your granddaughter live." The baby released a breath so thin Naomi felt it brush her skin before vanishing. She swallowed. "Now," she added, urgency slipping through for the first time. "Not later." The old man bowed his head. His shoulders shook, not from the wind. A drop of water, melted snow or a tear, slid down his cheek and froze halfway. He looked at the other two children. They looked back at him, wide-eyed, frightened, trusting in a way that hurt to see. "Grandpa," one whispered, their voice torn by the wind. "I'm cold." He drew in a deep breath, then let it out. One long beat, then another. When he lifted his head, his eyes had changed, no resistance left, only the fragile resolve of someone surrendering control for a chance. He nodded. A small nod, heavy as stone. Naomi didn't hesitate. She stepped in close and slid her hands beneath the baby's body, absorbing the sudden weight. The child was lighter than she expected. Far too light. The sensation struck straight through her chest, a reminder that time was nearly gone. She drew the baby toward herself, carefully supporting the head and neck, the way she'd done 100 times in memory. Cold seeped through her gloves, biting her skin. The baby didn't resist, didn't move. Only breathed, thin and distant. The old man let go. That instant, when life left familiar arms, made him falter, as if he'd lost part of his own body. Naomi felt it. She held his gaze for one more beat, letting him know the decision had been received. "Keep the other two close," she said, her voice returning to its steady rhythm. "Don't let them fall." He nodded again, faster now. He pulled the children in, wrapped his coat around them, shielding them with his body. Naomi turned, pressing the baby to her chest to block the wind. She felt every fragile breath through the layers of fabric. A car passed in the distance and vanished. No one stopped. Naomi didn't look back. She moved toward her truck, each step slow and sure to keep from slipping. The wind struck her back, but she bent forward, protecting the baby. The headlights carved a narrow, trembling path through the snow. Naomi felt her body shift into something else, focused, precise, without excess. Behind her, the old man and the two children followed, shaking but moving. Naomi heard heavy footsteps, ragged breathing. She didn't turn around, not from indifference, but because turning back would cost her a beat. When they reached the truck, Naomi stopped and angled herself so the wind no longer hit the baby directly. She looked at the old man, her eyes laying out what came next. Quick, clean, no panic. He nodded. He understood. The wind still howled, snow still fell, but something had changed between the headlights and that fragile breathing. Not because the storm had softened, but because a decision had been made, and now everything else had to keep up. Naomi placed her hand on the door handle, didn't open it yet, paused for a single beat, as if mapping the next steps in her head. Behind her, the old man pulled the children close. Ahead, the headlights spilled across the snow, opening the shortest path toward warmth. On that storm-buried roadside, fear didn't disappear. It simply made room for action. And as Naomi drew a deep breath, preparing for what came next, she knew, from this moment on, time would no longer stand still. Naomi opened the truck door with her elbow, keeping the baby pressed tight to her chest. Cold air flooded the cab instantly, as if the storm had been waiting for an invitation. She angled her body to block the wind and set the baby onto the front seat, turning the head and neck slowly, carefully, the way her hands remembered doing. The small body didn't resist. There was only breathing, thin, spaced out, brushing against her ear. "Sit close together," Naomi said, without turning around. "Keep each other warm." The old man pulled the two children into the back seat. The door slammed shut. The wind was cut off, but not silenced. It dropped to a low hiss, seeping through the seams, growling outside. Naomi started the engine. It coughed once, then settled into a steady rumble. A familiar rhythm, sturdier than it looked. She adjusted the heater, not all the way up. "Slow," she said, as much to herself as anyone else. "No shock." One of the children murmured a faint "okay." The old man said nothing. He sat upright, hands on his knees, shoulders locked tight. Naomi caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, face gray with cold, eyes fixed on the baby in the front seat. The truck eased forward. The rear tires slipped, then found traction. When Thatcher and said backway, Naomi kept her speed low and even. The headlights carved through the snow, opening a narrow, trembling corridor. She knew this rhythm, slower than fear, faster than hesitation. A curve appeared ahead. Naomi eased off the gas early, turned the wheel before she reached it, keeping the tires from being pulled sideways. She heard a sharp intake of breath from the back, then restraint. She didn't reassure them with words. She let the steering wheel do it. "How is she?" the old man asked, his voice rough, breaking at the end. Naomi glanced at the front seat. The baby's eyes were still closed, chest rising, falling, still there, but fragile. "She's breathing," Naomi said. "We keep it that way." The wind slammed into the side of the truck, rocking it slightly. Naomi corrected, held the line. In the back one child hiccuped, the other reached out and grabbed the old man's hand. Naomi heard fabric rustle as they pressed closer together. "What's your name?" Naomi asked, eyes on the road. A pause, then "Walter," he said. "Walter Hayes, they're your grandchildren?" She asked. "Yes." He hesitated, as if sorting the pieces in his head. "We were on vacation. There was an accident. The car slid out on a curve down there." He gestured behind them, where there was nothing now but snow and wind. "My son, they took him ahead. I thought they'd come back for us. But the storm came up fast." Naomi nodded once. She'd seen enough to know how those gaps were made. "The mountain doesn't like plans," she said. A short straight stretch opened up. Naomi held her speed. She listened as the baby's breathing shifted, a longer breath, then a shorter one. She adjusted the seat, leaned slightly, to keep the baby's head steady as the truck vibrated. "Thank you," Walter said suddenly, like the words had been waiting too long. Naomi cut him off gently. Later, the truck slid lightly over a patch of black ice. Naomi eased off the gas, didn't brake, let the tires search for grip. The body swayed, then settled. From the back seat came a released breath. Naomi felt her own heart jump, then fall back into rhythm with the engine. "Check her hands," Naomi said to Walter without looking back. "If they stiffen, tell me." He leaned forward, touched carefully. "Still cold," he said. "But not worse," Naomi nodded. "Good." Warm air began to spread from the vents. One of the children in the back stretched a hand forward, turning it slowly, like they were testing something new. "It's warm," they whispered, surprised. Naomi allowed herself one breath out. Just one. Then she focused again. Scattered houses appeared, low roofs, half buried in snow. Porch lights dim behind curtains. The town was somewhere down below, warm and unaware of the old truck climbing the mountainside. Naomi didn't look sideways, she watched the road. "You live up here?" Walter asked. "Yeah," Naomi said. "Most people don't like it." "Because of storms?" he asked. "Because of everything," she said, and left it there. A steep incline rose ahead. Naomi downshifted, letting the engine pull steadily. The truck growled but kept moving. Wind hit at an angle, snow slapping the windshield. She adjusted the wipers, kept the rhythm. Ahead the headlights caught a darker stretch, her turnoff narrower and steeper. Naomi slowed. "Almost there," she said. "Hold tight." The truck crawled onto the narrow road. The tires slipped, then held. Naomi made small, constant corrections. No jerking, no rushing. In the back seat, Walter leaned forward, shielding the children as the truck rocked. "What do you do?" Walter asked, clinging to something ordinary. "Manual work," Naomi said. "Fix things when I can." He nodded, didn't press. In the mirror, Naomi saw his eyes track her hands on the wheel, steady, precise, not shaking. Something eased just slightly. The wind softened as they climbed higher. Snow still fell, but thinner now. Naomi spotted a weak yellow glow ahead. Not streetlight, something else. She didn't say it. She just held her speed. The baby stirred faintly. Naomi leaned over, placed a hand on the small shoulder, warmer now. "I'm here," she murmured, not sure it was heard. The road curved gently. The yellow light grew clearer, steadier. Naomi eased off the gas, letting the truck roll. In the back seat, Walter lifted his head, peering through the windshield. "That's," he asked. Naomi nodded. Almost. She let the truck creep forward a few more yards, slowing even more, as if she didn't want to fracture the fragile moment taking shape. The yellow light stayed where it was, didn't vanish, didn't flicker out. The storm was still there, but it had stepped back. Naomi kept both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. She knew that just one more beat, one more decision would move everything into the next phase. But for now, Inside the old truck, climbing the mountain at a careful crawl, the only thing that mattered was keeping the rhythm, and she did. Naomi pulled the truck up close to the wooden steps. The engine shut off. Silence rushed in immediately. Not total silence, but a thick, warm kind, broken only by the wind scraping lightly along the house. Yellow light spilled from the windows into the yard, tinting the snow a pale honey color. "We're here," Naomi said quietly. Walter let out a long breath, as if only now allowing himself to believe it. The two children in the back lifted their heads, staring at the light ahead, not harsh, not distant, just close enough to make their shoulders sag with relief. Naomi opened the front door of the truck, keeping the baby pressed against her chest. Warm air from the house reached out and touched her face like a familiar hand. She stepped down carefully, then turned to block the wind as Walter opened the back door for the children. Naomi pushed the wooden door open with her shoulder. Heat poured out stronger now. The smell of old pine, cooled ash, and something warming on the stove, familiar, steady. A floor lamp beside the sofa cast soft shadows along the wall. Not fancy, not new, but enough to stop the shaking. "Ava," Naomi called, not loudly. "Micah." Small footsteps sounded in the hallway. Ava appeared first, 12 years old, hair hastily braided, eyes widening at the sight of strangers and the baby in her mother's arms. Micah followed, still holding a wooden spoon. "Get blankets," Naomi said, brief and calm. "Two, and towels." Ava didn't ask questions. She spun around, opened a cabinet, and pulled out 2 thick blankets. Micah set the spoon down and ran for towels from the bathroom. They moved fast but without chaos, as if they were used to listening and acting. Naomi laid the baby on the sofa, keeping the head and neck supported, then gently removed the soaked gloves. The baby's hands were stiff with cold. Naomi rubbed them between her own palms, slow and steady, letting the warmth spread gradually. Walter stood beside her, gripping the edge of the couch, not daring to step in. "Don't rush," Naomi said, as much to herself as anyone. "Slow." Ava spread the blankets, carefully pulling them up to the baby's shoulders. Micah set the dry towels nearby, then stepped back, eyes fixed on the pale face. Naomi adjusted the lamp so the light wouldn't shine directly into the baby's eyes. She placed a small space heater a short distance from the sofa, set it low. The fan hummed softly, steady. The baby stirred faintly. Naomi leaned in and placed 2 fingers on the wrist, pulse weak, but there. "Here," she murmured, not sure to whom. Walter's other 2 grandchildren sat down on the rug near the fireplace, shoulders pressed together. Ava handed them cups of warm water, not hot. "Small sips," she said, her voice quiet but firm. They obeyed. Walter watched everything in silence. His gaze moved from Naomi's hands, steady, precise, to her children, quick and composed, then around the house. The worn furniture, drawings taped to the fridge, a stack of unopened mail on the counter. Nothing showy, just the quiet readiness of a place that had faced hardship before, and learned how to stand. Naomi straightened and stepped into the kitchen. She set a pot of water on the stove, turned the heat low. Her hands still trembled slightly, but she didn't look at them. She returned to the sofa, checked the blankets, adjusted the pillow supporting the baby's head. The breathing was more regular now, not safe yet, but less fragile. "Thank you," Walter said softly, as if afraid to fracture what was forming. "I don't know how to." Naomi shook her head. "Sit," she said. "You're here." Walter did. He perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped, back straight, as if still shielding. A moment of silence passed, not heavy, not urgent. Outside, the wind still moved, but the wooden walls held it back. Snow tapped lightly against the windows, then stopped. Inside the small house on the mountainside, warmth spread slowly and evenly, like a promise that didn't need to be spoken. Naomi glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward. She drew in a deep breath, then let it out. The danger hadn't vanished completely, but it was standing outside the door now. And within that narrow pocket of safety, the things left unsaid finally had room to stay. The baby slept more deeply as the pot of water in the kitchen began to simmer. Naomi turned off the stove and left it there. She leaned against the counter, her back to the living room, listening to the steady hum of the space heater, and the thin but stable breathing from the sofa. Walter sat without moving. He stared at the wooden floor as if something there was waiting to be named. His grandchildren leaned against each other, eyelids heavy. Ava pulled another blanket over them. Micah set his empty cup on the table and drifted back toward his mother. The house was quiet enough for thoughts to echo. Walter began, then stopped. His throat worked. He cleared it, not quite enough to hide the tremor. When you stopped the truck, I was afraid. Naomi didn't turn right away. She rested her hand on the edge of the counter, feeling the cool wood beneath her palm. She let the words land, not heavy, but sharp, a short sentence that didn't need explaining. I thought, Walter continued, then let it trail off. He exhaled, as if realizing the rest wasn't necessary. I looked at you, and I was afraid. Naomi turned. She didn't frown, didn't rush her breath. She just looked at him, steady, direct, neither avoiding nor demanding. Tonight, she said quietly, isn't for being afraid of each other. The words hung in the air. No one rushed to fill the space. Walter nodded faintly, as if he'd been allowed to set something heavy down. He looked at the baby on the sofa, then at his two exhausted grandchildren. I'm not saying that to. He stopped, searching, not to ask for anything. Naomi nodded. I know. Another pause, not tense, not empty, just long enough for what hadn't been said to have somewhere to sit. Walter looked down at his hands, the hands that had clenched, hesitated, and finally let go. When you held your hands out, he said softly, I thought I was making the worst decision of my life. Naomi didn't interrupt. She let him reach the end of it. But I didn't have another choice, he went on. And, you didn't pull your hands back. Naomi exhaled slowly. You chose, she said. That was the hardest part. Walter lifted his head. His eyes met hers, no longer guarded, not yet peaceful, but honest. Thank you, he said, this time, unhurried, steady. Naomi nodded, just once. She turned back to the baby, blankets still in place, breathing more even. She rested a hand on Ava's shoulder, drawing the girl closer. Micah sat down on the rug, leaning against the chair. Outside, the wind eased, snow fell thinner. Inside the small house, a truth had been spoken, not to accuse, not to erase, but simply to be set down between them, with just enough weight. And as the wall clock ticked forward one more beat, Naomi knew what came next no longer belonged to fear, but to getting everyone back to where they were meant to be. Naomi was in the kitchen when the phone rang, a dry, sharp sound cutting through the quiet, just as it had settled. She glanced at the screen, then looked over at Walter. He nodded immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this moment far too long. I'll take it, Naomi said. She stepped aside and lifted the phone to her ear. On the other end, a man's voice burst out at once, urgent, fractured, trying and failing to stay calm. Naomi didn't interrupt. She let him speak, let the panic spend itself before she stepped in with short, steady sentences. He and the kids are here, Naomi said. They're safe. The baby's warming up. Take the northern pass straight up. I'll turn on the porch light. She heard a sharp breath, then silence, then a thank you, repeated more times than necessary. Naomi ended the call with one final instruction. Go slow, low beams. She returned to the living room. Walter rose the instant he met her eyes. He's coming, Naomi said. Your son. Walter lifted a hand to his face, covering his eyes for a very brief moment. When he lowered it, his shoulders had fully slumped. The two children looked at him, then at Naomi, then toward the door, their gaze fixed on something not yet visible, but already named. Naomi switched on the porch light. Yellow light spilled into the yard, warming the snow. She opened the door, letting the cold rush in for a moment, just enough to remind them the storm was still there, only pushed back. The sound of an engine carried from a distance, not roaring, not rushing, a steady rhythm drawing closer. Walter stepped onto the porch, stopping at the edge, eyes locked on the road. Naomi stood behind him, holding the door. The car emerged from the bend, slid lightly, then stopped at the steps. The door flew open before the engine fully died. A man jumped out, coat half-zipped, boots slipping on the snow. He ran past Naomi, past everything else, straight for the house. Dad, one of the children cried, springing off the rug. The reunion was fast and fractured. The man dropped to his knees, pulling the two children tight against his chest, sobs breaking out raw and unrestrained. Walter stood beside him, a trembling hand settling on his son's shoulder. On the sofa, the baby stirred, then opened her eyes, just a narrow slit. The man saw it. He crawled to the couch and took the tiny hand in his own. "I'm here," he said, voice breaking. "I'm here." Naomi stayed at the doorway, giving them space. She watched the moment unfold, neither stepping in nor stepping away, just long enough for everything to fall where it belonged. When the man finally stood, he turned to her. His eyes were red, his breathing uneven. "You," he began, then stopped. He swallowed. "Thank you." Naomi nodded. "Take them to the hospital," she said. "Keep them warm." He nodded again and again, like he was afraid to forget. They moved quickly, blankets folded, coats pulled on. Before leaving, the man paused, looking once more at the house, then at Naomi, his gaze lingering, as if there were something else he wanted to say. The door closed, the engine started. The car pulled away, taillights fading red into the snow. The house returned to silence. Naomi stood on the porch for another beat, watching tire tracks disappear as fresh snow filled them in. One danger had left, but she knew, not everything had gone with it. And in that quiet, something new began to take shape. Naomi was tidying up when the man came back. No noise, no rush, just footsteps stopping at the porch, then a very brief hesitation before a knock, light, as if afraid of disturbing something fragile that had just passed. Naomi opened the door. He stood there with his hat off, snow melting in his hair. His breathing hadn't fully steadied yet, but his eyes had changed, less panic now, more focus. "I'm sorry," he said first, as if he'd already decided the order of what mattered. "I forgot this." He held out a small bag, the baby's clothes, folded in a hurry. Naomi took it. "It's fine." He didn't leave right away. His gaze drifted across the living room, the sofa, the blankets neatly stacked, the heater turned low, then stopped at the kitchen. There, on the old wooden table, lay a stack of papers and a small object set among them, pencil lines tangled together, exposed wires, an unfinished plastic casing. "That is?" he asked softly. Naomi followed his gaze. She paused for a beat. "Something I was working on," she said. "Not finished." He stepped closer, not touching, just looking. The papers were filled with hand-drawn schematics, rushed notes, arrows linking blocks together. The small device looked rough, but purposeful, an idea trying to stand on its own. "Tracking?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Emergency, bad conditions." She didn't elaborate, didn't say why, didn't say how long it had been abandoned. He bent closer, reading the slanted handwriting. "You studied engineering?" "Before," Naomi said. "A long time ago." He straightened and looked at her, this time not with gratitude, and not with curiosity. It was the look of someone realizing that what they were seeing mattered beyond this moment. "If this worked," he said slowly, "tonight would have been different." Naomi neither denied it, nor agreed. She only said, "It needs time. And resources," he added. A quiet stretched between them. Outside, the wind had softened. Snow fell thin and slow. The small house had returned to its usual rhythm, but time itself seemed to have left a hand resting somewhere, not quite withdrawn. "I work in investment," he said, without pride or concealment. "I've seen plenty of ideas that were packaged better, and hollow. This isn't." Naomi folded her arms across her chest. "An old habit." "I'm not looking for funding," she said. "I'm not offering charity," he replied immediately. "I'm offering completion." The words stayed between them, not heavy, but weighted. He looked once more at the device, then at Naomi. "If you're willing," he said, "I'd like to help you build this properly." Naomi looked down at her hands, old cuts, skin dry from cold. She remembered doors closing, ideas dying young because no one waited long enough. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," he replied. "I'll leave my card." He set it on the table, not sliding it toward her, just placing it there, the way you place a seed into soil. When the door closed behind him, Naomi stood still for a long time. She looked at the papers, at the unfinished device. There was no applause, no promise, just a possibility that had finally been named, and left where it was. She gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, then she set them aside, not to put them away, just to make room for what came next. In the house that had weathered a long night, something else began to take root, quietly, uncertainly, but no longer invisible. When the last car turned off the narrow road and disappeared around the bend, the small house on the mountainside returned to its original state, quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that lingers after everything has withdrawn too quickly. Naomi locked the door. The metal bolt clicked, dry and final, then fell silent. She leaned her back against the door for a beat, eyes closed, as if to make sure she was still here. Outside, the wind had softened, only light snowfall remained, brushing gently against the roof. She took off her coat. The wet fabric dropped onto a chair, leaving a dark patch on the wooden floor. Her hands were still shaking, not much, but enough for her to notice. She rubbed her palms together, feeling heat and cold overlap, as if her body hadn't decided yet which state it belonged to. In the kitchen, the light was still on. The pot of water had gone cold. Naomi didn't turn it off right away. She pulled out a chair and sat down, resting both hands on the table. Under the yellow light, the old scratches in the wood stood out, marks of time, of work done quietly. Ava appeared in the doorway, hesitating. "Mom," she said softly. Naomi looked up. "Yeah?" Ava stepped inside and sat across from her. She studied her mother's hands for a long moment, then asked the question no one had asked all night. "Were you scared?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window, where darkness covered the yard, where tire tracks were already being erased by snow. The question stayed between them, not demanding a quick reply. "I think," Naomi said slowly, "I thought I wouldn't make it in time." Ava nodded faintly, understanding in her own way. She reached out and placed her hand over her mother's, warm, steady. "But you did." Naomi nodded once. She squeezed Ava's hand for a beat, then let go. Micah appeared next, silent, leaning against the table. The kitchen was small enough that their presence filled it. Naomi stood and went into the bathroom. She closed the door and rested her forehead against the mirror. Her breath fogged the glass. She looked at her hands, the same hands she had held out in the storm, the same hands that had been seen as a threat. The image returned sharply, the old man pulling the children back, the wary look, the defensive movement. Naomi closed her eyes. Not anger, not resentment, just a small sharp ache resting under the skin, so familiar she'd learned how to step over it, without stopping. She slid down to sit on the bathroom floor, back against the wall, cold tile, clothes still damp with snow. She didn't cry, not yet. She just sat there, letting her body slow, letting what she'd held tight all night finally loosen. Footsteps outside. Ava knocked, a very gentle knock. "Mom, you okay?" Naomi took a deep breath. "Yeah, just give me a minute." She stood, splashed warm water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror, tired eyes, skin tight from the cold, but her gaze still steady. She turned off the bathroom light and went back to the kitchen. Ava and Micah had straightened the chairs, as if they understood that small order was a way of keeping things from breaking. Naomi sat down again. She let the silence stay. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside, a residual tremor remained. Not loud, not violent, just enough to remind her that some storms don't disappear with the snow. And as the second hand on the clock completed another circle, Naomi knew there were stories not yet opened, things buried deep, waiting for a night quiet enough to return. Naomi couldn't sleep. The house had gone quiet. Ava and Micah were in bed. The wall clock ticked steadily, as if trying to impose order on a night that had drifted too far from normal. Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. Outside the window, snow reflected the pale moonlight, no longer violent, just still, as if it had never caused any harm at all. It was that stillness that let the memories rise. There had been snow that day too, not as deep as tonight's, but cold enough to numb the hands. Naomi had been much younger then, her hair still long, her hands uncalloused. She stood in an engineering lecture hall, surrounded by rows of men, the only one who didn't look like the rest, the only one questioned more than necessary. "Are you sure? Can you really handle this? This isn't an easy field." She had been sure. She had handled it. She had studied things complex enough to make her head ache, and she loved it. She loved the idea that things could be understood, repaired, made better with enough patience. She believed competence would speak for itself. Then she met her husband, a quiet man, few words, working outdoors. He never asked why she chose that field. He only asked, "Do you like it?" And when she nodded, he smiled, as if that settled everything. The accident happened on a night like this, a late drive, a mountain road, a curve underestimated. The car rolled down the slope. Naomi arrived when a thin layer of snow had already settled, just enough to blur the tracks, just enough to slow everything down. Rescue arrived too late, not because they didn't try, but because the locator equipment failed in the storm. Weak signal, batteries drained too fast, time slipped away in nameless intervals of waiting. Naomi remembered standing there, shaking, calling his name into the white, remembered headlights, sweeping past and moving on, remembered the way people avoided looking directly at her when there was nothing left to be done. He died before he ever reached the ambulance. After that, Naomi never went back to the lecture halls. She didn't formally quit, she just stopped. The drawings were folded away, the ideas boxed up. She learned how to live doing what was necessary, instead of what might change things. Tonight in the small kitchen on the mountainside, that memory no longer felt distant. Naomi looked at her hands, the same hands she had held out in the storm. Her husband's face overlapped with the image of the baby on the sofa, two different faces. The same fragile rhythm of breath, so delicate that everything depended on whether someone stopped or not. Another memory surfaced, deeper, one she rarely allowed up. A different night, long ago. Naomi standing on the side of the road, clutching a phone with no signal, waving at passing cars, snow blowing sideways, her voice calling out, no one stopping. Headlights washed over her face and vanished. She had stood there a long time, long enough for her voice to go hoarse, long enough that she stopped calling and simply watched. Tonight when Naomi stood between the storm and that grandfather with his grandchildren, her body remembered before her mind could name it. She hadn't thought, she had only known she could not be the car that passed by. In the kitchen, Naomi stood and opened a drawer. She took out a bundle of old papers, unfinished sketches, hurried notes from years ago. She spread them across the table, lines that trembled but made sense, ideas left behind because no one waited long enough. She didn't cry, not anymore. She only looked, understanding at last why this night had unfolded the way it had, why she couldn't turn away, why Walter's words on the roadside had struck something so deep. Outside the wind was completely still, the snow lay quiet. Naomi gathered the papers and stacked them neatly. She didn't make a decision then. She simply placed them back in the drawer, unlocked, as if leaving a door ajar. She turned off the kitchen light and walked toward her bedroom. Before closing the door, she looked once more at the house, small, old, peaceful. Some nights change a life through very small things, and some pasts, once faced directly, no longer bind you. They become the reason you never turn away again. News spread the way it always does in small places, no headlines, no confirmation. It slipped past checkout counters, threaded itself into half-finished conversations, lingered in parking lots, before car doors fully closed. I heard it was the black woman up on the mountain. She saved a white family in the storm. Really? Naomi heard it the first time, while standing in line at the grocery store. She didn't turn around. She set the milk on the conveyor belt, and kept her eyes forward. The cashier glanced at her, then offered a smile, polite, a little too careful. That storm was brutal, someone behind her said, like they were talking about the weather. Lucky everyone made it. Naomi paid, gathered her bags and walked out. In the parking lot, the wind was mild. Snow had been cleared away, exposing streaks of gray slush. She opened her truck, set the groceries inside, unhurried. The next day, the story gained details. The day after that, it gained opinions. I heard she stopped right on the pass, reckless. Or maybe she wanted attention. Naomi passed familiar faces, some people nodded, slow, awkward, some looked away faster than usual. Others stared a little too long as if weighing something they didn't yet have words for. At the coffee shop she heard her name, not spoken directly but close enough to recognize. What do you think her motive was? Someone whispered. Who knows, another voice replied. Naomi took a sip of her coffee, bitter and lukewarm. She set the cup down. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She'd learned long ago that explanations were rarely heard when they were offered. That afternoon, at the butcher counter, a man beside her said to his companion, his voice not bothering to lower, "Good thing that old guy survived. Otherwise, she'd be in serious trouble." The sentence slid through the air like a thin blade. Naomi stood still for a beat. Her hand tightened around the basket handle. No one looked at her. No one spoke up. The words remained, unclaimed, unanswered. She set the basket down, chose a cut of meat, paid. Outside, weak sunlight reflected off melting snow, revealing dark rivulets underneath. She stepped out and released a long breath. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. At home, Ava asked, "What are they saying about you?" Naomi folded laundry, stacking it neatly. "A lot of things," she said. "None of it's true," Ava said firmly. Naomi looked at her daughter. "Some things don't need to be true to exist," she said. "But they don't decide who I am." Micah sat at the table, drawing straight lines on paper, then erasing them. "I see how they look," he said without lifting his head. Naomi rested a hand on his shoulder. "I see it too." Days passed. The story didn't disappear, it changed shape. Some people praised her carefully, some doubted her, predictably. No one asked Naomi what she wanted to say, and Naomi didn't volunteer. That evening, she walked down the main street. Storefront windows reflected her image, worn coat, familiar stride. One acquaintance nodded, then turned away. Another smiled, but didn't step closer. Naomi understood this. Saving someone doesn't change a town overnight. It only poses a question, and leaves it there. By the time she got home, snow had started to fall again, light, sparse. She hung up her coat, washed her hands, stood at the window, and looked out into the yard. Footprints faded as she watched. The whispers didn't make her turn away, but they touched a place that had been hurt before. A place where someone is asked to prove what should never have needed proving. Naomi turned off the light and went to her bedroom. In the quiet she knew the story wasn't finished yet. Not out there, but where truth and memory were about to meet, close enough to fracture something inside. Naomi was hanging her coat when the phone vibrated. She froze halfway, not because the sound was loud, but because instinct had learned to recognize calls that didn't feel ordinary. The screen lit up. An unfamiliar number. Naomi stared at it for one beat, then answered. "Miss Carter." The voice on the other end was neutral, tired. "We're calling from the hospital." Naomi leaned back against the wall. "Yes." There was a brief pause, just long enough for her to understand that what came next would need room to land. "The baby," the voice continued, "was treated in time." Naomi closed her eyes. She didn't ask anything. She waited. She suffered internal trauma from cold exposure and impact. The voice said, precise and even. If it had been delayed another 15 minutes, the outcome would have been different. 15 minutes, the number hovered in the air. Not large, not small, just a narrow space between still and gone. "And now?" Naomi asked. Her voice sounded strange, as if someone else were using it. "Stable," the caller replied. "She'll need monitoring, but she's past the most dangerous point." Naomi nodded, even though the person couldn't see her. "Thank you." The call ended. The screen went dark. The house was silent. Naomi stood there for a long time. Her coat still hung crooked on the hook. One hand rested against the wall, feeling the cool surface. She inhaled, slowly, then let it out. Her body seemed unsure what to do next, now that there was no task left to complete. Ava appeared in the hallway. "Mom?" she asked. Naomi turned. She nodded. "She's okay," she said. "She's okay." Ava exhaled, a smile breaking free and fading just as quickly, as if she didn't dare hold it too long. Micah peeked out from behind her. "Really?" he asked. "Really," Naomi said. The two children looked at each other, then wrapped their arms around one another. Naomi watched them, her chest tightening, relief braided with pain. She walked into the bathroom, and closed the door. The fluorescent light flicked on, white and cold. Naomi stood before the mirror. Her face was paler than usual. Dark shadows rested beneath her eyes. She turned on the tap and let warm water run over her hands, over the small cuts that hadn't fully healed yet. 15 minutes. She shut off the water and stared at her reflection, trying to assemble what she'd heard into something she could bear. She had kept her rhythm. She hadn't panicked. She'd done the right things. but the number 15 refused to leave. She slid down to the floor, back against the sink. Cold tile seeped through her clothes, still damp with snow. Naomi rested her forehead against her knees. In that moment, everything she'd been holding tight for days, the counted breaths, the decisions that allowed no margin for error, began to slip. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a crack opening, she cried. Not sobs that broke into sound, just uneven breathing, shoulders shaking, tears falling without permission. Naomi let it happen. She didn't stop it. She didn't explain it to anyone. This was the only room in the house where she allowed herself to collapse. 15 minutes. 15 minutes she had taken back. 15 minutes she had once lost. Old images surged forward, rescue lights reflecting off snow, her husband's still face, the reassurance that came too late. Naomi wrapped her arms tightly around herself, as if holding the woman she had been all those years ago. She didn't know how long she sat there. When she stood, her legs tingled with pins and needles. She washed her face, dried it, looked again into the mirror. Red eyes, but her gaze was no longer lost. She opened the door. Ava stood just outside, one hand resting on the frame, as if afraid to knock too hard. "Mom, I heard the water," she said softly. Naomi nodded. "I'm okay." She pulled Ava into an embrace. Ava held on tight. Micah slipped in too, arms smaller but sure. They stood like that for a moment. No one spoke. Naomi felt their breathing, warm, steady. She let go first and smiled, tired but real. The evening passed slowly. Naomi cooked, ate a few bites, cleaned up. She replied to a brief message from the baby's father, just confirmation that things were okay. Nothing more. Night settled. The house grew still. Naomi returned to the bathroom once more. Not to cry, but to sit quietly. She placed a hand over her chest, and felt her heart beat, slower now. She thought about the number again, but differently, not as a blade, but as a line she had pushed back. Outside, snow fell softly. The house stood firm. Somewhere in a hospital room, a baby was breathing more evenly. Naomi stood, turned off the light. Before leaving, she looked once more at the space that had witnessed her quiet breaking. She felt no shame in it. She understood now that breaking didn't erase what she'd done. It only proved she was human. When Naomi returned to her bedroom, she lay down and pulled the blanket up, her eyes closed. For the first time in many nights, sleep came, light, but enough. And at the edge of that sleep, something else began to take shape, not quite relief, not quite pain, but something waiting to be spoken, waiting to be faced. Naomi didn't yet know it would come sooner than she expected. Walter arrived in the late afternoon, when the snow had melted into thin streams along the walkway. Naomi saw him through the front window before she heard the knock, standing straight, holding a small cardboard box, as if he needed something tangible to keep himself from turning away. Naomi opened the door. A faint breath of cold slipped inside. "I don't want to intrude," Walter said immediately, his voice unsteady but clear. "If this isn't a good time, come in," Naomi said, stepping aside. Walter entered, removed his hat, and set the box on the table. "Pastries," he said, as if naming the simplest thing first mattered. "I didn't know what you liked." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, neither rushing. Ava and Micah were in the back room, their low voices drifting faintly through the house. Walter heard them. His expression softened, then tightened again, as he remembered why he'd come. "I came to say something," he said plainly. "Not because my grandchild is okay. Not because of what people are saying." He paused, drew a breath. "Because of me." Naomi leaned against the kitchen counter and folded her arms. She didn't nod. She didn't prompt him. "When you stopped your truck," Walter said, "I was afraid of you." He didn't soften the words. "Not because of the night, not because of the storm, but because of who you were, to me in that moment." The sentence landed without excuse. "I pulled my grandchildren back," he went on, his voice low, "as if you were the danger. I'm ashamed of that." Naomi didn't respond right away. She looked at him, an older man now than he'd been during the storm, shoulders slumped, one hand resting on the edge of the table, as if to steady himself. She let the silence do its work. Walter swallowed. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. I needed to say it." Naomi exhaled, slow and measured. You were afraid of me, she said, repeating it without accusation. But you still handed your grandchild to me. Walter looked up, his eyes met hers, surprised, as if that thought hadn't fully formed before. That, Naomi continued, her voice even matters more than an apology. Walter stood very still, his shoulders trembled slightly, he nodded, slowly, as if something had just settled into place, something he hadn't had words for before. I chose, he said, quietly. Yes, Naomi replied, and you took responsibility for that choice. Another pause followed, neither heavy nor sharp, just enough for everything to rest where it belonged. Walter placed his hand on the box of pastries, then drew it back. Thank you, he said. This time, his voice didn't shake. For that night, and for now. Naomi nodded. Take care of the kids, she said. Walter smiled, a tired smile, but a real one. He put on his hat, and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back and looked at Naomi for one more beat, not like a man in debt, but like someone who had learned something late, yet not too late. The door closed, the kitchen returned to quiet. Naomi stood there for a moment, then opened the box of pastries. The smell of butter drifted out. She set it aside, not because it wasn't needed, but because some things are received in other ways. Outside, the town was still whispering. But inside the small house on the mountainside, a confrontation had ended, not with victory, but with just enough growth to move forward. And Naomi knew the next step would not be easy at all. The conference room was smaller than Naomi had expected. Not in size, but in atmosphere, dense and dry, as if everything had already been decided before she stepped inside. The windows looked out over a parking lot, where melting snow had turned into dark, irregular streaks. Thin folders lay neatly stacked on the table. No one opened them. Naomi placed the small box on the table, the locator device still rough, its plastic casing unfinished, wires carefully secured. She stood straight, arms at her sides, feeling her heartbeat settle into a rhythm steady enough to speak. This device functions in low-signal conditions, she began. Extreme cold, poor visibility. It doesn't replace rescue teams, it buys time. A man at the head of the table nodded faintly without looking at the device. Another flipped a page, then stopped. Naomi continued, brief, precise, about battery drain, frequency range, early field tests. She didn't sell a vision. She laid out a necessity. When she finished, the room fell silent. The idea is interesting, someone said after a beat. But our budget is limited. Another voice added, polite, it's not practical enough for large-scale deployment. Naomi waited. She was used to waiting for the hard questions, technical ones, safety concerns. They never came. We recommend you seek private funding, the man at the head of the table concluded. The council can't support this. No vote, no further discussion. The words landed lightly and decisively. Naomi nodded. Thank you for your time. She gathered the device and placed it back in its box. The papers remained untouched. She stepped into the hallway, the door closed behind her, the latch clicking dryly before falling silent. The hallway was long and overly bright. Naomi walked slowly, letting her heart rate drop. She thought of the storm, of 15 minutes, of what she had seen and what still wasn't enough. At the steps outside, she paused to pull on her coat. Someone came out behind her, moving faster, as if hoping not to be recognized. Naomi, the man called. She turned. He stood there, a familiar face. Too familiar, a man who had once driven past her in a storm years ago. Naomi remembered the headlights washing over her, never slowing. Now he stood before her, tie neatly adjusted, voice lowered just enough to avoid attention. Don't misunderstand, he said, clearing space for himself. This decision wasn't personal. Naomi looked at him, expressionless. I didn't take it that way. He nodded, as if a duty had been fulfilled. Good luck. He walked away. Naomi stayed where she was, the old sensation rising again, not anger, but a familiar pressure in her chest, like the weight that comes when effort meets a door with no handle on the inside. Out in the parking lot, the cold wind cut lightly. Naomi opened the trunk and set the box inside. The device gave a faint sound as it touched metal. She closed the trunk and stood there another moment, watching snow melt into water. At home, evening came early. Naomi set the box on the kitchen table, opened it, checked each component, as if the flaw might be hiding in a screw, in a circuit. But everything was as before, not wrong, just not accepted. Ava watched her from the doorway. How did it go? Naomi shrugged, not approved. Micah set his pencil down. So we try again. Naomi smiled, just slightly. Maybe. She cleaned the kitchen, washed her hands, sat down. The fatigue arrived slowly but deep. She thought of the offer to help finish it, of the business card still on the table. She thought of the town, of the whispers. Night fell. Naomi carried the device into the garage. She set it on the workbench and turned on the light. White light spilled over exposed wires, imperfect solder joints. She touched the plastic casing, cold. She didn't fix anything. Not yet. She turned off the light and closed the garage door. In the dark, the sense of failure spread, not dramatic, not shattered, just an emptiness wide enough to swallow hope if left alone. Naomi didn't leave it alone. She stood on the porch for one more beat, looking down the road. Snow began to fall again, light and sparse. Old tire tracks faded. She knew she had hit bottom in the most familiar way, rejected, doubted, told she was unrealistic. And at that very moment, when everything seemed closed off, Naomi didn't know that what she carried with her wasn't the device, but proof, already on its way to her, faster than the storm had ever been. Naomi was in the garage when the doorbell rang. Not urgent, not insistent, one short press, then silence. She turned off the desk lamp, set the screwdriver down, wiped her hands on a rag. The fatigue from the meeting still clung to her, dense and heavy, but something in the rhythm of the bell made her straighten. She opened the door. The man on the porch was the baby's father, coat neat, hair still damp, his eyes no longer panicked but tight with focus. He didn't step inside right away. He looked at Naomi, then past her into the house, as if he needed to be sure this was still the place that had kept his child alive. "I'm sorry to come so late," he said. "I need to talk." Naomi nodded. "Come in." He stepped inside and set a slim briefcase on the kitchen table. No small talk, no easing in. He unlatched it and took out a stack of papers and a small memory card, placing them side by side. "I went back over everything," he said. "Not to say thank you, to understand." Naomi stayed standing, leaning against the counter, arms folded. "What are you saying?" "That night, on the pass." He paused. There were dash cams. Naomi blinked. "From who?" "Mine," he said. "And 2 cars behind us." He tapped the memory card. "I asked for copies." He slid the card into his laptop and opened the screen. Blue light washed over the kitchen. The video appeared, grainy, jittering from the wind. Snow slicing sideways across the frame. A dark road, headlights streaking past. Then the image slowed, an old pickup decelerating. Stopping, headlights cutting across 3 figures on the shoulder. The next clips showed other vehicles, one, then another, passing without slowing. Naomi felt her chest tighten, not from surprise, from confirmation. "You were the only one who stopped," the man said quietly. "I watched it again and again." The video continued. Naomi stepping out of the truck, the distance she kept, the measured movements, no rush, no pressure. Then the moment the baby was passed into her arms, blurred but unmistakable. He closed the laptop. The kitchen returned to warm yellow light. "After the meeting yesterday," he said, "I knew I couldn't stay quiet." He met Naomi's eyes. Not to demand gratitude, to stop the story from being twisted. Naomi was silent. She thought of the comment at the butcher counter, the sterile hallway, the headlights that had passed her years ago. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Make it public," he said. Then carefully, "the right way." The next morning, the town woke up to a link. No headline, no commentary. Just a short video posted with a simple line beneath it. "Storm on the northern pass." Naomi watched it once. She didn't watch it again. It spread anyway, first among people who already knew the story, then among those who knew nothing except what the footage showed. One truck slowing, others passing. Snow closing in behind them. The comments were brief, unembellished. Most of them said the same thing in different ways. At the grocery store, the shift was subtle, a longer look, a nod that hadn't been there before. The cashier smiled without hesitation. "I saw the video," someone said. Naomi nodded and kept moving. Messages came from unfamiliar numbers. Some offered thanks, some offered apologies. Naomi read them and didn't respond. Whatever needed to be seen had already been seen. That afternoon, an email arrived from the council. It was shorter than the rejection had been. "We'd like to revisit your proposal." Naomi closed the laptop and stepped onto the porch. Snow drifted down, light enough to settle without sound. The road below was quiet. That evening, the baby's father came by. He carried a folder this time, thicker than before. "I showed it," he said. "I didn't explain it." Naomi nodded. They sat at the table. Inside the folder were plans, practical ones. Test routes, timelines, names of people willing to try. "No shortcuts," Naomi said. "None," he agreed. Later, in the garage, Naomi turned on the light and opened the box. The device looked the same as it had the day before. Unfinished, unremarkable. She tightened a joint, secured a wire, worked slowly. Snow fell again that night, and months later it fell on the pass once more. Not hard, not dangerous, just enough to soften the world's edges. Naomi drove the familiar road. At the curve she slowed. A figure stood near the shoulder. Naomi braked. The truck came to a stop. She turned off the radio and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and known. She didn't know who the person was. She didn't know what had brought them there. She only knew she couldn't keep driving. Naomi stepped out of the truck. If you want more emotional, heartwarming stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel where stories of kindness, healing, and second chances come to life through powerful narration. Follow for more touching stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that might just change someone's day. Thank you for reading. See you in the next story.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.